The unexpected visitor. Commander Alex Monroe had never imagined his quiet shift on the starbound horizon would end with such an urgent call to action. The vastness of space was supposed to be a place of exploration and discovery, but today it felt like a cold, unyielding abyss. His hands rested lightly on the console, eyes scanning the usual readings, ship systems, fuel levels, and asteroid reports. But then something caught his attention. A flicker on the monitor. A disturbance in the far reaches of the galaxy. It wasn't a typical blip of space debris or a minor fluctuation in the station's energy readings. This was something else. A pulse. A transmission. Weak, but unmistakably clear. Monroe's brow furrowed as the message began to play. "Please, help us. We are on the verge of destruction. We seek asylum. Take us as your slaves, or all will be lost." The words rang through the ship's speaker system, causing an unsettling chill to run down Monroe's spine. Slaves. The plea made no sense. Why would an alien species request sanctuary under such terms? The question gnawed at him as he leaned closer to the monitor. His crew, too, gathered around, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Any idea where this is coming from?" Monroe asked, his voice steady despite the unease settling in his gut. "Yes, Commander," replied Lieutenant Sarah Blake, her fingers dancing over the controls. "It's coming from the Aster Nebula, a sector that's been off-limits due to its unstable nature. The signal's origin is an uncharted ship, possibly a distress beacon." Monroe's gaze hardened. An unknown alien species in distress, begging for sanctuary. The situation felt eerily familiar to the many cautionary tales that had warned of unknown threats lurking in the depths of space. Yet something in the voice of the message tugged at Monroe's conscience. It was laced with desperation, with fear, and something else. Something human. "Set a course for the nebula, Lieutenant," Monroe ordered, his voice resolute. "We won't ignore this. Prepare for full medical and security teams. If this is a trap, we'll handle it. But if someone is really out there, we need to be ready." As the ship's engines powered up, Monroe couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would change everything. They were about to encounter something, or someone, that could alter the course of human history. The desperate bargain. The stars outside the starbound horizon flickered like distant embers as Commander Alex Monroe stood at the helm of the bridge, the weight of the decision he had made pressing down on him. The alien craft, the one that had sent the desperate distress signal, was now docked safely within their hold. And yet, the gravity of the situation had only grown heavier. "We're approaching the nebula's edge, Commander," Lieutenant Sarah Blake's voice interrupted his thoughts. "The Boran fleet is still in deep space, but they'll be within firing range within hours." Monroe turned, his gaze focused and unyielding. "Prepare all systems for defensive operations. I don't care if it's an entire fleet. Whatever they throw at us, we'll be ready." But even as he spoke, the knot of uncertainty in his gut tightened. The starbound horizon wasn't a warship. It was a science vessel, equipped for exploration and research. But for this mission, it had become... Lyra reached out, taking his hand gently. Her touch was warm, but there was a tremor in her fingers. "It's not just me. You must understand. The Boran fleet doesn't want just me. They want my daughter, Alara." Her eyes met Monroe's, and in that moment, he saw something he hadn't expected, something beyond fear, something deeper. Alara is the key to everything. They will stop at nothing to capture her, to force her into a political marriage that will unite our two species. They will use her to invade your world. Monroe felt a sudden chill. "Your daughter?" "Yes," Lyra said, nodding slowly. "She is of royal blood, the last of our line. Her existence represents the possibility of a powerful alliance, a new dynasty that would give the Borans control of an entire galaxy. If they take her, they will enslave her, using her as leverage in their schemes. It is our bloodline they seek." Monroe's mind reeled as the implications of her words settled in. The Borans, a ruthless and expansionist species, had already conquered countless worlds, but now they were targeting a child, a princess who, in their eyes, was the key to their ultimate victory. Lara looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. "Please, Commander, I beg you, take us as your slaves. It is the only way to protect us, to protect your people. If you allow the Borans to capture us, Earth will fall. They will launch an invasion, one that will leave your world in ruins." Monroe recoiled at the words, slaves. The thought was unfathomable. He had always seen humanity as a force for freedom, a species that fought for justice and liberty. To be asked to accept 2 refugees and offer them as slaves, it went against everything he stood for. But as he looked at Lara, the desperation in her eyes left him no choice but to consider the gravity of the situation. Earth was unprepared for an attack from the Boran fleet. The starbound horizon could barely hold its own against such a force, and the idea of fighting a war with an alien species, especially one as merciless as the Borans, was a nightmare Monroe had hoped to avoid. "I don't know if I can do that," Monroe said quietly. "I can't offer you as slaves to our people. We can't." Lara cut him off, her voice urgent. "You don't understand, Commander. It's not about what you can or can't do. It's about survival. If you don't protect us, if you don't stand with us, the Borans will slaughter you all. They won't just take our people, they will take your world." Monroe felt a pang in his chest as the reality of her words sank in. The Boran fleet was on its way. The clock was ticking. And as much as he hated the idea of slavery, he knew that Lara was right. If he didn't protect them, Earth would fall. "We'll have to fight," Monroe said finally, his voice firm with resolve. "We'll do everything we can to protect you and your daughter, Lara, but we're not offering you as slaves. We're offering you sanctuary. If that means going to war with the Borans, then so be it. We will fight for your survival, and for ours." Lara's face softened as a wave of gratitude swept over her. "Thank you, Commander. I had feared you would turn us away." Monroe stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest. "No one will be turned away, not while I'm in command. Now let's prepare for the battle ahead. We're going to need everything we've got to face the Borans." As the crew of the Starbound Horizon prepared for the battle of their lives, Monroe couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unity. In the face of overwhelming odds, humanity had always fought back. They had shown resilience in the darkest of times, and now they would do the same for a princess and her daughter, for a world they had never known, and for the future of all sentient beings who sought peace. The fight for survival had begun, and there would be no turning back. The Silent Alliance. The Starbound Horizon hummed quietly as it moved deeper into the nebula, the thick, colorful gases of the Aster Nebula swirling around the ship like a vast cosmic ocean. Inside, Commander Alex Monroe paced the command center, his mind racing. The decision to offer sanctuary to Princess Lara and her daughter, Alara, had set into motion a chain of events that could not be undone. The Boran fleet was out there, somewhere in the darkness of space, closing in on them. Every sensor on the ship was now tuned to detect any movement from the Boran ships, and the crew had worked tirelessly to prepare for the coming conflict. Despite the chaos and urgency of the situation, there was an eerie calm aboard the Starbound Horizon. It wasn't just the tension of war hanging in the air. It was the gravity of the alliance that had begun to form. The princess and her daughter, once considered enemies, were now humanity's last hope against a galactic power that sought to crush them. "Commander," Lieutenant Blake's voice broke through Monroe's thoughts. "The Boran fleet has just entered the sector. They're on an intercept course with us. Estimated time of arrival, 1 hour." Monroe felt a tightening in his chest. The clock was ticking, and there was no turning back now. "Status on the defenses?" he asked, turning to Lieutenant Riley, the ship's tactical officer. "We've patched together what we can," Riley said, his fingers moving swiftly over the console. "The Starbound Horizon isn't a warship, but we've installed the strongest shielding we have, and the weapon systems are operational, though we may not have enough firepower to withstand a full assault." Monroe nodded grimly. "That's what I was afraid of. But we'll hold our ground." The princess's secret. As Monroe made his way to the med bay to speak with Lyra, a heavy sense of responsibility weighed on him. He had promised her safety, sanctuary. But now, the warships of the Boran fleet were bearing down on them, and he feared that his promise might be an empty one. When he entered the med bay, Lyra was seated beside her daughter's bed, Alara sleeping peacefully beside her. The princess looked up, her lavender skin pale in the soft light, but there was a new determination in her eyes. "Commander Monroe," she greeted him, her voice quiet but resolute. "You've kept your word, and for that, I am deeply grateful. But I must be honest with you." She paused, her gaze shifting to her daughter. "There is more to this situation than I have told you." Monroe's heart skipped a beat. He had known there was more to the story, there always was, but hearing those words from Lyra's lips made him uneasy. "What are you saying?" he asked carefully, his voice steady. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes dark with the weight of unspoken truths. "Alara is not just the last of our bloodline," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "She is the key to something much larger. The Borans, they want her not just for her lineage, but because of her abilities. She has powers that are unique, even among our people, powers that could change the fate of the galaxy." Monroe's eyes widened. What kind of powers? "Her abilities are tied to the ancient Elron technology," Lyra explained. "For centuries, my people have harnessed energy in ways that others cannot. We were once the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, but the Borans destroyed us. They believe that if they can capture Alara, they can unlock the secrets of our technology and use it to dominate the galaxy." Monroe's mind raced as the full scope of the situation began to unfold. This wasn't just a political struggle. This was a fight for control over a power that could reshape the entire galaxy. The Borans had always been ruthless in their pursuit of conquest, but with this technology in their hands, they would become an unstoppable force. "We can't let that happen," Monroe said, his voice firm. "We'll protect her, Lyra. We'll do everything we can to keep your daughter safe." Lyra's eyes shimmered with gratitude. "Thank you, Commander. You don't know how much that means, but there is one more thing you must understand. If the Borans find us, they will stop at nothing to take Alara. They will not just fight us. They will annihilate everything in their path. And if they succeed, Earth will be the next target." Monroe felt the weight of her words sink in. The threat wasn't just about saving 2 refugees, it was about the survival of humanity itself. The Borans had the power to destroy entire worlds, and if they found Alara, they would use her as a weapon of unimaginable destruction. The first strike. As the hours passed, the crew continued to prepare for the inevitable. The Boran fleet was drawing closer, and there was no more time for hesitation. Monroe convened a final strategy meeting with his senior officers. "We have one chance to get this right," he said, addressing the room. "We're not a warship, and we're outnumbered, but we have something the Borans don't. We have the element of surprise. Our mission is simple: hold off the Borans long enough for Lyra and her daughter to escape to a safe location." Lieutenant Riley stepped forward, his face grim. "We can't hide them forever, Commander. Once the Borans detect us, they will send everything they have. If we're not ready, we won't make it out alive." "I know," Monroe said, his voice low and steady, "but we have to try. We can't let them capture Alara, not when we're so close to stopping them." The plan was set into motion. As the Boran fleet came within range, the starbound horizon prepared to make its stand. Monroe watched from the bridge as the enemy ships grew larger in the view screen. They were a terrifying sight. Massive, heavily armored vessels that bore the scars of countless battles. The Borans were not a species that gave up easily. "Commander," Blake said, her voice tight with tension, "they're charging their weapons." "Brace for impact," Monroe ordered, his voice cutting through the growing tension. "Riley, target their lead ship. Fire on my mark." Monroe's heart raced as the first shots were fired from the Boran fleet, sending a ripple of energy through the starbound horizon. The ship rocked under the assault, but the shields held, glowing with the strain of the incoming fire. "Return fire," Monroe commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before him. "We fight to protect Earth, and we fight to protect Alara." As the crew of the starbound horizon launched their first strike against the Boran fleet, Monroe's resolve never wavered. They might be outmatched, but humanity had always fought against impossible odds. And this time, they were fighting for something much greater than themselves. They were fighting for survival, for the future of their world, and for the innocent lives they had sworn to protect. The unexpected ally. Just as the battle seemed to reach a fever pitch, something unexpected happened. A signal, faint at first, began to come through their communication systems. A new ship had arrived, moving swiftly through the chaos of the fight. Monroe's eyes widened as the identification flashed on the screen. Elron-class dreadnought. "That's impossible," Riley muttered. "The Elrons were destroyed centuries ago." "Not all of them," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. "That ship, it's the last of our people, a hidden faction of survivors. They came to help." The tide of battle had just shifted, and with it, a glimmer of hope that had once seemed lost. The fight for survival was far from over. But now, they had allies who could turn the tide. A desperate gambit. The battle raged outside the starbound horizon, a chaotic dance of flashing weapons, spinning debris, and the crackling energy shields that kept the ship intact. Commander Alex Monroe stood at the bridge, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen as the Boran fleet advanced relentlessly. The initial exchange of fire had been brutal, and it was clear that they couldn't hold out forever. The ship's hull groaned under the assault, but the crew remained steadfast. They had one chance, just one, to make it out alive, and the stakes were higher than ever. Monroe's heart pounded in his chest. As he had promised, the starbound horizon would stand firm. But the truth was unavoidable. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and running out of time. The Boran fleet was closing in, and without reinforcements, they wouldn't last much longer. "Commander," Lieutenant Sarah Blake's voice broke through his thoughts, her face taut with worry. "We've detected another ship. It's not one of ours. It's an Elron vessel." Monroe's pulse quickened. "Elron," he repeated. "Are you sure?" "Yes, Commander," Blake confirmed. It's a dreadnought-class ship, heavily armed. But it doesn't match any known Boran designs." Lyra, who had joined the crew on the bridge, looked up sharply at the mention of the Elron vessel. Her expression was one of disbelief mixed with cautious hope. "It's them. They came." "Who came?" Monroe asked, turning to her. "My people," Lyra said softly. "I told you there were survivors, a faction of Elrons who escaped the Boran purge. They'd been hiding in the deepest reaches of space, waiting for the right moment to strike back. And now, they've come." The sudden appearance of the Elron ship sent a wave of hope through the crew, but Monroe knew better than to let his guard down. The Borans had no mercy, and an enemy fleet of this magnitude would not be easily deterred by reinforcements. "Can they hold off the Borans?" Monroe asked, keeping his voice steady, though doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. Lyra hesitated. "It's possible. The Elrons were once the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. If they still possess their technology, their weapons could be more than a match for the Borans." Monroe glanced at the tactical screen. The Boran fleet was just moments away from striking again, and his options were running thin. The Elron ship's arrival was a lifeline, but it could also be a trap. He couldn't afford to take any chances. "Let's not waste any time," Monroe ordered, his mind racing through every possibility. "Contact the Elron ship. Let's see if we can forge an alliance." A fateful meeting. Monroe's heart thudded in his chest as the communication link with the Elrond ship established a connection. The view screen flickered for a moment, then cleared to reveal the image of a tall, regal-looking figure. Her skin was the same soft lavender tone as Lyra's, but her eyes, though filled with centuries of experience, carried an intensity that Monroe had never seen before. "Commander Monroe," she said in a voice that was both commanding and reassuring. "I am Ilora, captain of the Ascended Dawn. It seems our paths have crossed at a most opportune time." Monroe nodded, barely able to mask his relief. "We're grateful for your arrival, Captain. The Boran fleet is on our tail, and we need all the help we can get. Can your ship engage them?" Ilora's lips curved into a thin smile. "We are more than capable. But the real question, Commander, is whether we can work together to defeat the Borans. If we are to stand any chance, we must combine our forces." Monroe turned to Lyra, who stood by his side. She nodded in agreement. "The Elronds have always been allies of the human race. This is our chance to end the Boran threat once and for all." Ilora's eyes flicked to Lyra, then back to Monroe. "Indeed, the time for cooperation has come. The Borans are not just after your planet. They seek to control the entire galaxy, and it's time we stop them." Monroe's mind raced. The appearance of the Elrond ship was a game-changer, but the idea of working with a species that had been hiding for so long was a daunting thought. They had no idea what kind of price they would have to pay for their assistance. "You're asking us to trust you completely," Monroe said, his voice edged with caution. "We don't know what the Borans are planning, and we don't know if your people can be fully trusted. What's the catch?" Ilora's expression softened slightly. "There is no catch, Commander, but there is a price, one that both your people and mine must pay. The Borans are coming to destroy us all. If we do not unite, we will be crushed. But if we stand together, we can finally push them back." Monroe considered her words carefully. His instincts told him that this was a gamble, but he had no choice. The Borans were closing in, and their ship couldn't survive a prolonged battle. He had to make the decision now. "All right," Monroe said, his voice firm. "We'll fight together. But know this, we won't let anyone take our world without a fight. Let's make sure this works." Ilora nodded, her eyes flashing with resolve. "Then let's begin." The war begins. With the alliance forged, the starbound horizon and the Ascended Dawn prepared for battle. The Boran fleet was within striking distance, and this was their last chance to turn the tide. Monroe stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the console, as he watched the massive ships draw closer. He had no illusions about what was coming. This would be a fight for survival, one that would test every ounce of human and Elrond resolve. The Ascended Dawn moved into position, its weapons systems charging. The Elrond dreadnought unleashed a salvo of devastating energy blasts, sending shockwaves through the vacuum of space as it engaged the Boran lid ship. The starbound horizon followed suit, releasing its own barrage of firepower. The Borans retaliated almost immediately, their weapons lashing out with deadly precision. The shields of the starbound horizon flickered as it absorbed the brunt of the attack, but the ship held firm. Monroe watched in awe as the two allied ships launched coordinated strikes against the Borans, the Elrond firepower overwhelming their defenses. It was clear the Borans had underestimated the combined strength of humanity and the Elronds. But as the battle raged, Monroe couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Boran fleet would fight to the death, and there was no telling how many more ships they had in reserve. But with the Elronds by their side, for the first time in this long fight, Monroe felt the spark of hope. As the Borans struggled to regroup, the tide of the battle shifted in their favor. But this victory, Monroe knew, came at a steep price. The war had only just begun. The starbound horizon and the Ascended Dawn were ready for whatever came next. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders, and they would not falter. Shadows of betrayal. The battle had raged for hours, and the starbound horizon was beginning to show signs of wear. The Boran fleet, though temporarily pushed back by the combined force of the Elrons and humans, wasn't retreating. They were regrouping. Monroe's fingers tightened around the armrest of his command chair as he watched the Boran ships reform their lines on the tactical display. This wasn't over yet. The Borans would come again, more prepared, more vicious than ever before. "We've made a dent in their fleet, but we can't keep this up forever," Lieutenant Riley reported, his voice grim. "We need more time to repair the ship's systems, but with their reinforcements on the way, that may not be enough." Monroe nodded, his mind racing for a solution. "How much time do we have?" Blake, still monitoring the Elron ships, answered. "Not much. The Borans are deploying more ships. They're calling in reinforcements from nearby sectors. If we don't act soon, this could escalate into an all-out war." The bridge fell into a heavy silence. The stakes had risen from a simple rescue mission to an intergalactic conflict, and Monroe knew there was no turning back. The fate of two worlds, and the very future of humanity, hung in the balance. "Commander Monroe," Alora's voice crackled through the comm, breaking the tension. "We've detected a weakness in their formation. If we can disable their central command ship, we might be able to force them into retreat. But we need to coordinate our efforts perfectly. A single mistake, and we lose everything." Monroe glanced at the Elron captain's image on the screen, her eyes filled with determination. "We'll do it. Riley, get ready to fire on my mark. Blake, keep an eye on their movements. We'll need precise timing to make this work." An unlikely betrayal. Just as the strategy was set into motion, something unexpected happened. Transmission came through on a secure channel. Monroe's eyes narrowed when the encryption key was recognized. It was from a source he hadn't anticipated, one of his own officers. It was Lieutenant Sarah Blake. "Commander," Blake's voice came through, but it was shaky, filled with uncertainty. "I need to tell you something." Monroe's pulse quickened. "What's going on, Blake?" The transmission cut out momentarily, and then came through again, this time with a harsh static buzz in the background. Blake's voice was barely audible now, but Monroe could hear the desperation in her words. I've been working with the Borans from the beginning. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I thought I could control the situation. But now it's out of my hands. I've been feeding them intel about your movements. They're coming, Monroe. The Boran fleet is set to attack in full force. More ships than we've anticipated. I didn't want it to go this far, but they promised me protection, my family." Monroe's heart dropped into his stomach. The sound of betrayal was a bitter, sharp taste in his mouth. "Why, Blake? Why betray us? You were a part of this crew." "I didn't have a choice," she replied, her voice cracking. "They promised they wouldn't hurt my family, that they would ensure their safety if I cooperated. But now, they're going to destroy everything you've worked for. I'm sorry, Commander. I couldn't protect them anymore." Monroe stood frozen, shock and anger battling within him. He had trusted Blake, and now her treachery threatened to undo everything. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but there was no time for that. The Boran fleet was still advancing, and now Monroe had to face an even graver threat, one from within. "Where are you now, Blake?" Monroe asked, his voice tight with restrained fury. There was a long pause, then a crackling reply. "I'm on the starbound horizon, Commander. I've disabled the communication system to prevent them from hearing this transmission. But they're coming for me now. They know I'm not loyal anymore. They're going to kill me. And they'll use my family against you. You need to stop them. Now." Monroe clenched his fists, his mind racing. The plan to take down the Boran command ship was still in motion, but now there was an even greater urgency. Blake had given them valuable information, but her betrayal had put everything at risk. The Borans were moving faster, and they now knew where the starbound horizon was, what their defenses were like. The ship, already on the brink of collapse, was more vulnerable than ever. "Why, Laura, we need to accelerate our plan," Monroe said quickly, turning to the Elron captain. "We can't wait for their reinforcements. The Borans have a spy on board. They know our every move." The Laura's eyes flashed with understanding. "We'll handle the fleet. You must deal with Blake's betrayal. She's the one who let them in. And if she's still aboard your ship, you can't risk having her escape." A dangerous gamble. As Monroe gave the order to prepare for an assault on the Boran command ship, a wave of cold realization swept over him. The betrayal was not just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, more insidious plan. If the Borans had agents within the ranks of the starbound horizon, it meant they had infiltrated not only the crew, but also the very heart of the ship's operations. They had been playing a dangerous game of manipulation, and Monroe had been a pawn. The entire battle had shifted in an instant. Monroe's plan was no longer just about holding off the Borans. It was about stopping Blake before she could cause further harm. She knew too much, and her ties to the Borans meant that she could expose everything. Monroe couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not when they were so close to victory. "Blake is a liability," Monroe said to his senior officers, his voice grim. "We can't allow her to sabotage this mission. I'm sending a team to find her, neutralize the threat." Riley nodded, his face hardening. "We'll handle it, Commander." Meanwhile, the Laura's fleet had already taken up position, and the starbound horizon was readying its weapons. The moment Blake's betrayal was dealt with, they would initiate the final phase of their plan, an all-out assault on the Boran command ship, targeting its engines and disabling its weapon systems. Monroe stood at the command center, his fists clenched. The time for subtlety was over. He had to trust in his crew, even those who had failed him. The battle for Earth, and for the future, had become a fight for everything they had. He would not lose. The final confrontation. As Monroe's team moved through the corridors of the starbound horizon, searching for Blake, the tension on the bridge reached a breaking point. The Elron ship's cannon fire rang out in the distance as the Boran ships regrouped, preparing for the final assault. Monroe knew that his crew's loyalty had been tested, but now it was his turn to make the ultimate choice. In the face of betrayal, would he sacrifice everything to protect Earth? Would he stand by his promise, or would this war, this conflict, become one where no one, not even him, could escape the consequences of their decisions? The answer would come soon, and it would define the fate of the galaxy. The heart of the storm. The tension in the starbound horizon was palpable. Every creak and groan of the ship seemed to echo through the corridors like a warning. The Boran fleet had regrouped, and their battle formations were shifting into position for a final decisive strike. Outside, the vast emptiness of space was a silent witness to the chaos unfolding as the ascendant dawn and starbound horizon prepared for what could be their last stand. Commander Alex Monroe stood alone in the observation deck, watching the stars flicker beyond the reinforced windows. In the quiet of space, the enormity of the situation became clear. There was no going back. His decision to trust the Elrons, to form this fragile alliance, had been the right one. But now it would be put to the ultimate test. "Commander," Blake's voice crackled through the calm, distant, and unrecognizable. "They've breached the lower levels. The Borans are already infiltrating the ship." Monroe's heart stopped. Blake had been a mole, feeding information to the enemy, but now she had gone further than just betrayal. She had actively opened the gates for the Borans to board the ship. The thought of it was unbearable. Blake, a trusted officer, had become a symbol of the very treachery they were fighting against. "We don't have time," Monroe muttered to himself. He turned and headed toward the bridge, his mind racing. The enemy was on their doorstep, and now the fight wasn't just about winning. It was about survival. As he entered the bridge, Lieutenant Riley was already at his post, his hands flying over the controls with quick efficiency. "Commander, we're about to engage the Boran command ship. The Ascended Dawn is holding its position. But we're outnumbered. Their reinforcements will arrive soon." Monroe stood tall, his resolve firm. Prepare for immediate action. We strike first. Give them no time to organize. But, Commander, Riley began, his voice hesitant, Blake's intel might have compromised everything. If we can't stop her, we won't have the upper hand. Monroe cut him off, his voice colder than he'd ever heard it before. I'll deal with Blake. You keep us in the fight. The betrayer's fate. The corridors of the starbound horizon had transformed into a war zone. Lights flickered intermittently, and alarms blared as the crew fought back the Boran invaders. Monroe moved quickly, his thoughts focused solely on one thing. Blake. She had gone too far. And now, there could be no mercy. He couldn't allow her to jeopardize everything they'd worked for. She had to be stopped before she could destroy them all. As Monroe moved deeper into the ship, the hallways grew eerily quiet. There were no sounds of battle here, only the faint hum of the ship's failing systems and the distant sound of running footsteps echoing in the dark. His instincts told him that Blake was somewhere ahead, moving with purpose, probably setting up one final betrayal. Monroe's grip tightened around the plasma rifle in his hand, his heart steady despite the chaos around him. The door to the engineering bay slid open with a hiss, revealing Blake. She was standing by the main console, her back turned, typing furiously. She hadn't seen him yet. Blake. Monroe's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Blake spun around, her face pale and strained. For a moment, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, before it was replaced by something colder. Monroe, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't want it to come to this. Then why did you betray us? Monroe asked, stepping closer. Why let the Borans in? Blake's eyes flashed, a mix of fear and anger. You think I had a choice? You think I could just stand by and watch them destroy everything I've ever cared about? They promised to protect my family, Monroe. They promised. And you betrayed your crew for them. Monroe finished for her, his voice hard. You put your family above your duty, above your people. Do you really think we could just forget that? Blake's face twisted with a mixture of guilt and defiance. I never thought it would get this far. I thought I could control it. But I'm not the villain here, Monroe. I didn't want this. The Borans, they're too powerful. I couldn't protect you all anymore. Monroe took another step forward, his rifle aimed directly at her chest. This is where it ends, Blake. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them was thick with unspoken words. Blake's eyes darted to the side, as if looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. The walls of the starbound horizon were closing in on her, just as her own guilt and fear had been closing in on her from the moment she'd first betrayed them. Monroe didn't want to be here, didn't want to be the one to pull the trigger. But Blake had forced his hand. There was no going back. Monroe, please, Blake whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how else to protect them. I didn't think you'd understand. I understand enough, Monroe said, his voice resolute. Enough to know that you've put us all in danger. With a quick motion, he raised the rifle, firing a shot that silenced the pain of betrayal. Blake's body crumpled to the ground, and Monroe's heart twisted at the thought of what she had once been. An ally, a friend, someone who had stood beside him. But now, there was no room for sentiment. She had crossed a line, and the consequences had been irreversible. The final assault. With Blake neutralized and the Borans still encroaching on the ship, Monroe's mind sharpened. He had to shift focus. There was no room for second-guessing, no time for hesitation. His crew needed him, and the Elrons were counting on him. The battle was reaching its climax, and now was the moment of truth. Riley, Monroe called over the comm, his voice cold with resolve. Deploy all remaining firepower. The Boran command ship has to be destroyed. No retreat. Yes, Commander, came Riley's response, and the bridge hummed with a renewed sense of urgency. Outside, the stars burned bright as the starbound horizon and ascendant dawn locked in their final confrontation with the Boran fleet. The battle had reached its peak. Every ship was firing at maximum capacity, and the space around them lit up with the fiery clash of energy blasts. Monroe's hands gripped the controls tightly as he watched the Boran flagship, massive and menacing, loom before them. This was the heart of the storm. Everything had led to this moment, this fight. "Prepare the final salvo," Monroe ordered. "Target their core. We're ending this now." With a thunderous roar, the combined might of the human and Elron forces unleashed a devastating volley of firepower at the heart of the Boran command ship. The shockwave of the explosion rippled through space, and for the first time, Monroe allowed himself a breath. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long time, they had a chance.